Hey everybody, and welcome this week to something a bit different than what I usually make. This is an investigation into the Basilisk games made by the video game developer Akuma Kira. I'll tell you in advance that this is a comprehensive breakdown going over nearly every interaction and hidden element in the games and how they connect. But I do not have an answer to some of the more vague parts of the story in the game, and at this point I'm starting to think only Kira does. I understand that this is probably the most comprehensive video to date, but not having an answer to your burning questions may frustrate you. If that's something you can deal with, enjoy as we investigate Basilisk 2000. Early in 2022, Basilisk was released to itch, being presented as an unfinished RPG for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, where you play as a knight tasked by your lord to solve the famine of the Kingdom of Mycenae. The game itself is the executable purporting itself to be an emulator. Navigating the emulator, you can play the unfinished Basilisk ROM. As a funny side note, there used to be a real ROM in the ROM folder, but someone found if you decompile and recompile the game, it was a Super Castlevania 4 ROM. This was swiftly fixed in a patch. The game drops you immediately into a dark forest. I'm gonna say at this point, I absolutely hate the original Basilisk, outside of playing the game as intended, also known as finding all the secrets. Your character walks painfully slow, and there's several maps that are much larger than your walking speed is reasonable to explore. Couple this with no direction to hidden landmarks, and a draw distance of about 8 feet, and it turns 20 minutes of exploring into 3 hours of exploring. That aside, the first area you're dropped into has a couple things of interest. The first is an obelisk. It's said to hum and is warm to the touch. This is something that'll appear later, so put a pin in the obelisk for now. The other thing available in this State 0 is a robed man called Scratch. He has dialogue that starts normal, talking about watching out while traveling to the Mycenae ruins, but his dialogue quickly becomes odd as he talks about a vein that connects the two worlds, and not to bother crossing that place, as it won't get you anywhere. Even in the later context of the game, I only have a faintest idea what Scratch is talking about here. Moving on to State 1, one of the first things you can run into is a computer which spouts Morse code when you interact with it. The Morse code spells out XP and nothing more. Next, there's a ritual circle you can find that claims the beast was defeated here 100 years ago. You can also at this point run into a tavern door, and if you interact with it, it'll take you to State 2. This is all there is to see in State 1, so we can actually go ahead and start State 2 from this point. Scratch is here, and he talks about how this keep is all that's left of the old kingdom, and something about a spurned lover, some girl he used to be sweet on, but she betrayed him, and now she's gone like everyone else. The rest of State 2 is a black void, so we can go right to State 3, which is similar to what we've been exploring, except white this time. Again, there's only a couple things to see here. Firstly is a bunch of ghosts who bemoan their deaths, and then a red sword which we can collect. We're going to do this very shortly, but for now let's continue on without it. State 4 only has one creature in it, some floating brain monster that says even if you kill everything, there will be one monster left. State 6 is a demo mode, where you're in the first person view of some monster killing civilians. You walk past Scratch unharmed though, curiously enough. As a little Easter egg, if you hit the interact button on Scratch when you walk by him, you'll get a text box that says, "What a horrible night to have a curse." That's all to see on State 6, so continuing on to State 7, on one side of a hallway is a pile of rubble blocking you from heading that direction. The other side has Scratch talking about how he's surprised that the Basilisk made its way into the castle. Walking through the doorway, you're dropped into a dark clear forest, and after walking for a little bit, you encounter an eye and die instantly. However, if we go back and collect the sword, we're dropped again into the forest, but this time when we walk to the end of the game, we encounter a knight and see an ending screen once we walk into them. A kinda confusing ending for sure, but it'll be explained once we begin exploring Basilisk 2000. But before we start exploring that game, let's cover one last secret I didn't cover in State 7. If you turn down the hallway towards the rubble, you can walk by the left side of the rubble and walk through said rubble. On the other side is an open area and an air sign that you can interact with. It echoes a few of Scratch's earlier sentiments about the vein that connects two games and how crossing this space won't get you anywhere. This time, though, the error says that the devil is in the details, and that the devil is in everything. And holy shit, is there a lot of details to go over. This is just the start, though. We've completed the first Basilisk, and can now move on to the second Basilisk game, Basilisk 2000. This part of the video is going to be broken down into areas. The areas are going to be covered in the order that they're likely to appear, along with how to find them. I don't know 100% every interaction in the game, but I would say that I know somewhere around 95% of them. Even as I was making this video, even into the final seconds, I was discovering new interactions. The areas covered will sometimes be sprinkled with context from Kira as it's relevant, as it does happen a couple times throughout Basilisk 2000. Having said all that, let's start with the itch page. The itch page gives some details about Basilisk 2000. It's said to be the spiritual successor to the original Basilisk. Basilisk 2000 is a level editor running in Unity. There's a disc you can look at on the itch page as well that has a couple more details too. The date on the disc was burned July 4th, and I'll go ahead and jump the gun and say it's confirmed that this disc was in fact burned in the year 2000. So this game we're playing now was last worked on July 4th, 2000. The two last things we can pull from this disk that are slightly important is the version date of the disk, which is 6.1, and there's also some initials at the top, a DB. There's several files we can explore that aren't in the game, but I only want to talk about two before we hop into the game. The first file is a promotional art for Basilisk 2000. The promotional picture talks about an advanced AI, an Umbra AI, that creates systems so NPCs can know they are about to die. This is very weird and is never referenced again anywhere in either the game or any of the supplementary materials or videos. It's only implied to have been created by a later member of the Basilisk 2000 team named Cassie, who makes the animations in AI for Basilisk. The other file I'd like to look at is the Notepad README. The note confirms a few details from the CD, like the fact the game is in 6.1 beta, and the original owner of the disc, DB, now is known as David Bunch. The notepad for David talks about how his development team was hoping to have a functional prototype out by August, and maybe have the game ready for a 2000 Christmas release. The last two things David mentions is a notepad feature for every area so you can take notes, and the inclusion of an AIM chat for the team members. However, David harumphs the team's wasting of time chatting on AIM instead of getting work done. David's section of the note ends with him pleading with the team to pull it together and ship this game because otherwise he's toast. The notepad is divided into a final section, this time from a Kyle Tubman, who has some interesting details for us. The game didn't have any more updates after this, likely because their production goals weren't reached or because the publisher wasn't impressed. Kyle doesn't know if it's a direct or spiritual sequel, and there's some mechanics of the game he doesn't understand. Kyle says that he bought the disc from eBay, but he couldn't find any more details out about the team or the game. He does say that he knows the people who worked on the original Basilisk and the people who worked on Basilisk 2000 were definitely not the same people, but Basilisk 2000 does apparently use some of the code from the original Basilisk. The production team's office no longer exists, and the number to contact them is dead. Interestingly enough, Kyle Tubman is also the guy who was in the README in the original Basilisk as well. With all that behind us, we're now able to start our journey into Basilisk 2000. The game fires up to a null screen, and in the notes it says to start the player in Havenwood. We can use the command load to load any map and put just about any yellow reference text afterwards in to load that map. We can load Havenwood in this manner, and we're dropped into the beginning of the game. There's a small town littered with NPCs and dev notes around, and we can see that we can play an intro cinematic. The cinematic details the story of the game. We're once again a knight arriving in Mycenae, but this time instead of a famine, the realm is onset with disease, a plague. A plague sweeps the land, turning the days hot and dry, and the night skies are growing strange serpentine lights that flow like water. Crops will die without your help. You arrive in the town of Havenwood to start your journey. And just like that, you're thrust into the game proper. Going over the UI controls quickly, there's a lot of quality of life stuff you can use. You can make the map show geometry instead of textures. You can disable the lighting, putting everything at the default lighting value. You can disable fog distance as well as foliage. The second to last button drops you into the game. You can also increase the draw distance and the size of the play screen in the top left, as well as input any weapon codes you may find. I recommend when diving into the game that you enable the big window mode. Increase the render distance to 500, the maximum, disable lighting, and disable foliage, and you'll have a way easier time finding things throughout the map. You can explore through free cam or walking on foot, but I generally be using the free cam unless there'd be a reason for me not to, which will happen a couple of times. You can clip through buildings and the ground, and sometimes it'll reveal secrets to you. The last thing I'll talk about before exploring this area is the edit menu. Anything you interact with in the game opens a small menu where you can change the position, size, and health and darkness of every character. Health is pretty straightforward, but what is darkness? Different characters in the game have different darkness levels, and generally the higher the level of darkness, the more evil their alignment. Kira has said themselves that the darkness levels of an NPC gives context to an NPC's alignment. Put a pin in this for now, because when we have enough interesting NPCs to compare darkness levels to, we will. For now, let's finally look at Havenwood. Your small town is really nothing special. The NPCs nearby are mostly friendly and say very introductory things, truly nothing special. The only thing to note in the immediate town area are the barkeep, who you may not know exists if you don't go through the wall of the tavern to see him, and the mutilated corpse of your childhood rival in the attic of one of the houses. Interestingly, he has a fairly high darkness score at 70%. There's nothing else in the game that references this, but it is such an odd detail to not note now while it's relevant. Exiting Havenwood, you'll pass an untextured statue of a torn knight. If we pull out to the surrounding areas and NPCs, we can see an enemy serpent with a whopping 80% darkness, as well as a goblin encampment with identical darkness ratings for them of 80% as well. Here's where you'll find your first weapon, a crude club. A nearby lost merchant is looking for Havenwood and has some articles for sale. They're mostly uninteresting, except for a broken snake medallion, which has RIT on it. RIT is interestingly written in a yellow, but you can't teleport to any RITs, so we'll shelve this information for now. In a nearby graveyard, there's an NPC called Witness, who says that those afflicted with what's called the Serpent's Curse aren't allowed to be buried in this graveyard. There isn't a lot to be seen in the graveyard, but there are a couple interesting headstone notes, like one that says, "It can kill with just a glance," and "You could not save them." In quick succession, the last things of note here are an actually textured torn knight statue, a person looking for the lost Hall of Skeletons, a signpost leading out of the town called Crossroads, and a man looking for food in Taurus. At this point, it's worth noting that there's a day-night cycle in the game too, and if you change your time to night, you unlock new interactions with some NPCs. This map features two of those interactions. The first is in the graveyard with the Witness NPC, who asks why they can't have the same peace the residents of the graveyard have, just because they're from Desarest. This is interesting because it implies all the residents of this Desarest place are afflicted with the Serpent's Curse. The only other night cycle thing of note here is a Minotaur that overlooks the town. The Minotaur is the first creature to have a fully 100% darkness rating, and that's Havenwood fully explored, and with that, we've discovered several new locations. I'd like to explore the dead ends first quickly, the first being the Hall of Skeletons. In the notes, we can see that Alan has been wasting his time modeling these skeletons into meme poses, much to the chagrin of David, the project head. There's an NPC here in what I'm calling a chef hat. He comes up later. Thankfully, that's all there is to this fun little Easter egg area. Next, we'll explore Taurus as it's very short. Taurus opens, and in the notes we can see just the word transcend. On the other side of the ring we spawn on is a David NPC who says, "My milk went bad today." After a few seconds, a video plays of David Lynch talking about how the taste of a donut can transcend you. This is actually a very short excerpt of David Lynch's documentary, Meditation, Creativity, Peace. It's got some parallels you can draw to Basilisk 2000, but that would be diluting this video and escaping the subject matter quite a bit. After a couple seconds of the donut video plays, you're immediately thrust into a map called a race, as fleshy pustulating and spinny meat things while sunfishes float in the sky. You're only able to explore this place on foot, and to prevent a headache, I've simply screenshotted the messages available by getting near to the sunfish, as you're kicked out of the map after a few seconds, and it's very easy to fall through the map. From here, we'll visit the Crossroads area. As you might expect of a crossroads, it has signposts that can lead us to a few new areas, namely Namor and Chapel 00. We also get tipped off by a visiting NPC of Mycenae Castle. There's 2 nearby weapons we can collect as well. One is a golden staff on top of a tower, and a standard sword in the pond outside of the chapel. There's only 2 things of note here otherwise. Firstly is an NPC that when you interact with it, lets off a sharp static noise and gives no other information about itself, and a group of cultists over top a hillside. Note that these NPCs again have 100% darkness attributed to them. I also think the cultist robes look very similar to Scratch's clothes from the original Basilisk, but it may be a bit of a stretch to say that they're too related, but maybe after watching this whole video you may think otherwise. The cultists are looking for their holy relic, a serpent fang sword. Jumping the gun a bit, but to talk about it now while it's relevant, you bring them back the cursed serpent fang. They're happy to let you keep it, claiming that since it's found an owner, everything will be fine. That's all to see in Crossroads. From here, let's go to the chapel since it's also short. The chapel has 2 guards inside and several lore tablets. The tablets tell the story of the first game, of a brave knight who stood against a dark basilisk. The knight slayed the basilisk, but since he was the only person left, cried out in pain. The knight then cut himself in 2, calling the 2 halves night and day. The day half took the form of a stone, which spun over and over into an egg. The night half formed into water, which surrounded the egg, and the water turned into a snake. Through this union, humankind was born. The egg broke and became the mountains and the canyons, and the snake became the ocean. Something very to point out at this juncture is that in mythology, basilisks are born from the egg of a serpent hatched by a chicken. However, in this creation story, if a snake had hatched the egg of a chicken, it would be a cockatrice, which is kind of like a big chicken dragon. Another glaring thing of note is the fact that humans existed before this creation account, so something already isn't adding up here in Basilisk 2000. This is another area with a special day-night effect, as if you come here at night, the guards are dead with missing body parts. One is missing a limb, and the other is missing their upper jaw. The next place we're going to explore is Namor. Namor is a desert town that's rotting. One house even has a rotting effect over it. Next door to that house is a man who asks you to help his sick mother by acquiring some healing water. If you step inside his house, his mom is indeed afflicted with the serpent plague and has a whopping 80% darkness, similar to the other walking serpents nearby just outside of town. The hunchback serpents have 80% darkness, and a variant that has a long vertical neck has 90% darkness. Back in town, a man hangs from the gallows while a guard and his dog watches. A man in town says that there's no water to be had in town and to ask somewhere else. Finally, there's a merchant in town who allows you to acquire the Steel Club. The Steel Club also has 200 tack highlighted in yellow. I'll tell you now, I have no idea why. I have to assume this was a mistake because there's no reason it should be highlighted. It's not a place you can visit, it's not a fragment of a place you can visit, it can't be decoded into a place you can visit, and it's not referenced anywhere again by anyone. Your guess is as good as mine on that one. Outside of town are a few more notable interactables. A pair of bandits try to rob you in one corner. In another corner, a man gives you a lead on some healing water out of a place called Palethar. Outside of town is a curiously empty coffin that just says, "Escaped." Nearby is a tower, and inside is a smiley face that says, "I know what you did." In the next corner of Namor is a signet with health and a darkness reading, surrounded by beached ships. Very weird. In the final corner is a pyramid where the bones of sand whales poke out of the ground. Behind the pyramid are 2 guys watching a man on the ground who's their prisoner. They remark very curiously that he's very dangerous. The prisoner jokes that it's been a rough day at the office. The prisoner also seems to be the man with the chef's hat from earlier. The only thing that doesn't quite hold up is his darkness level, which has changed from the Hall of Skeletons from 0% to 50%. Just something to keep in the back of your mind, as nobody else in the game shares his model except for someone way down the timeline. I'm curious if maybe the man in the chef's hat isn't also linked to the coffin on the other side of the map, but they're awfully far from one another. Just think about it. We finally completed Namor, and we'll follow the quest line for the healing water. The NPCs around Palethar will talk about how it used to have huge, beautiful trees and flowing healing water, which is evidently now missing, as there's nothing left but very large stone pillars, with some NPCs scattered around within them. A crestfallen NPC says how they've given up, and underneath of the map beneath them is the same NPC but later on in their quest line who says that it's just a waste since the healing water is gone, unlocking another area to explore. The other NPCs nearby just talk about how the water was dried up and how their town is dying. However, underneath one pillar is an NPC who advertises visiting a map called Exception 8. Here you can also find the cursed serpent fang as well. From here the trail runs cold, but in the interest of continuing the quest, I'll nudge us towards the Mycenae Castle. Mycenae Castle is a dark area with a storm adding to the doom and gloom here. Approaching the castle, there are NPCs strewn about who try and usher you out of the area, claiming that the king is sick. A nearby man also says that he's pled with the guards to go to the Krimgur dungeon and hunt the Minotaur, but they won't listen to him. If you clip inside of the castle into the upper area, there are 3 NPCs. One tells you shouldn't be here, another says that he did what had to be done, and the final NPC is dead, apparently afflicted with the serpent's curse. The implication is that they infected the king, leading to his death, but I will say this. Besides cultists, nobody seems to revere the serpent's curse except for presumably these NPCs. These NPCs in the castle also don't have too high of a darkness score. I wonder if the king was about to turn and the NPCs instead killed him to prevent him from becoming one of the serpents. Outside, near the lake, is a barbarian who complains that a witch stole his clothes and an axe. On top of a hill is a mountain troll, and not far from him is another NPC who says he's not scared of the mountain troll because they have real trolls where he's from in Wake Lita Summit. The last thing to see is this goofy-ass man named Ted under the map. He's entirely an Easter egg and has no relevance to the plot. Kinda cool that he's one of the few animated things in the game though. We've got our next step now in the pursuit of the healing water though, as we set our sights on Krimgur Dungeon. The Krimgur Dungeon is a unique sort of area. There are corpses and rats strewn about here in the dungeon, and a new sword can be picked up called the Blood Sword. The Minotaur is here also, but he doesn't do much. There's 2 interesting things here in the dungeon though. At the bottom of the dungeon is a simple tome that reads, "Woe upon all who enter here." But if you fly up out of the boundaries of the map, you can see a few tomes that read in order. Born impure, life from death due to cursed blood. Corruption bursts the snake anew, and is this land lost beyond all hope? Also, if you turn the music off here in the dungeons, you can listen and hear weird sounds in certain spots in the dungeon. Kira mentioned this was the second part of a puzzle from earlier around the 2 parts of a medallion, where the earlier half said RIT, and if you interacted with the invisible medallion following a certain sound cue, you get the second half that said UAL. Kira isn't actually sure if they added this to the game though, and I wasn't able to find it after 40 minutes of looking. I tried interacting with everything inside of the dungeon, and a little bit out of the bounds area here, but this area also coincidentally is one of the largest out-of-bound areas in the game, so I gave up on that. It's not important anyways, because this puzzle was actually guessed with just 1 half. Kind of funny though that if people hadn't guessed it, and the game wasn't later updated to include the medallion, a huge portion of the game would have been inaccessible. That's all that there is here in the Krimgur Dungeon. Wake Lita Summit is actually kind of short, so we'll cover it next. Wake Lita is a snowy mountain area and features only 1 human NPC that warns you to be careful if you plan on going up the mountain. Out in the snowy plains are 3 things of interest. The first is a mine entrance that you can't go into or access in any way. Secondly is a monolith, which is curiously at 100% darkness. There's no other distinguishing characteristics of it there though, not descriptions of it being warm or anything unlike the monolith from the original Basilisk. Something interesting about the foliage in this area though. Trees in Basilisk 2000 are 3D, but only here are the trees 2D, again similar to the original Basilisk. Finally, there's an Ice Drake, which has the highest darkness level in the game at 200%. The Ice Drake is never referenced anywhere else, and also no other darkness score in the game comes even close to 200%. Climbing to the top of the mountain, there are miscellaneous unimportant graves here. There's also 2 more tablets here that say, "A dying choking howl echoed through time, though no one could hear it for it was so long and so deep as the rumblings of the earth itself. It died one day, and the silence could be heard. Its absence was noticed by all." Behind the tablets is a broken moon, and if you raise the Y value of it into the sky, it's struck with lightning. You're then teleported onto a moon, where there's what appears to be a sunfish surrounded by a shell of light. If you look closely though at the sunfish model, it's usually flat, but the moon sunfish seems to have something wrapped around it. Maybe a serpent? There's text for the sunfish. It says, "A cold angel rests here." Let's go ahead and wrap up the main game before we explore all the bonus areas. To do this, we need to visit Ritual. In Ritual, we can see a destroyed town, as well as a giant monster called the Torn Basilisk. Parallel to the Basilisk is a man hanging from a tree with an odd name, and his text box says, "It's all my fault, all because of the," and then some garbled text. If we combine that text with this NPC's name, and then run the latter part through a rotation cipher, it would be a yellow text for a cell known as Event. We can pocket this for now and visit another corner of the map. There are rows of computers. This is probably one of my least favorite additions to the game because without context it's entirely misleading. The row of computers talk about a project that while the developer is proud they worked on, they still consider traumatic. So who might this be talking about? Maybe David and his former projects? Maybe one of his co-workers sneaking in some venting? Nope. Any theory you have would be woefully incorrect. This is in reference to Akuma Kira's work on the Dread X3 collection, as confirmed by Kira themselves. Okay then, back to the Basilisk. We can drop the health of it to 0. While the Torn Basilisk has more than 1,000 health, it gets a god suffix, but this applies to every NPC in the game, so it's really nothing special. When the Basilisk dies though, the outro cinematic plays. The outro tells how the Torn Knight mythos was actually a myth. The Basilisk was indeed a man, a knight, who had killed a kingdom's starving people until no one was left to hunger except for himself for blood. But now the new hero of Basilisk 2000 ripped open the skin of the vile Torn Basilisk and lets out the light. Cool game. Now that we've covered all the main areas, we can cover the extra areas. Firstly, we'll get the elephant in the room out of the way and visit the office area. Once inside, you can see an office area with a corporate team on the wall. Once you continue further inside, you can meet all the members of the development team. There's Alan, who makes 3D models, Greg the programmer, who notably has 100% darkness, George, who made the music, Dave, who's the art lead and texture designer, Cassie, who makes animations in the AI, and finally David Bunch, the chief engineer and manager. But wait, this guy has a cute chef's hat and 50% darkness, like another NPC we met earlier, even though they have different names. On George's desk is a note that says they're sick and tired of this, and that some days they just want to burn this building down. If you clip through the wall on your way to meet the team, you may notice an inverted poster that says, "I want to leave." We can add that to the list of places to explore. The last thing I want to show is hidden under David Bunch's desk. A firearm of some kind, along with overlaid text that says, "Not going to keep taking it." If you drop everyone but David's HP to 0, you get warped to a new map, Office 2000. Office 2000 is notably darker, and in the interest of telling this map's story chronologically, we'll start this time from David's office. The gun under his desk is gone, and so is David. In the area where all the NPCs were before, are the NPCs with pools of blood near them, and their HP gone. Everyone has pleading last words, except for Greg, who is curiously apathetic about the situation, again with 100% darkness. Checking George's note, we can see it change to, "I didn't do it, please." The only thing to see here is a pile of chairs blocking the exit to the office and pools of blood leading to a nearby restroom, where Dave hides, murmuring to himself not to let him find Dave. That's all to be seen here. Next we visit Exception 8, that seems to be a testing zone. There's a test trigger here that says Alan is tired, as well as a dead Greg NPC that says, "Get to work, blah blah blah." A note from Dave Seuss says that the foliage test here was successful. If you assume that there's an Exception 8, you might also assume that there's at least the numbers 1 through 9 as well. You'd be partially right, as there is one other exception called Exception 7. When you load into this map, you can acquire the test weapon placeholder axe, as well as see some uninteresting test NPCs and a giant floating sunfish with 1,000 life and 0 darkness. Randomly though, in the corner of the map will be a cube. I tested this a few times and it does seem to be random with no specific trigger or triggers, so to experience a cube you may have to reset the Exception 7 cell a few times. Also, the cube can only be experienced once you touch it once, so in order to do it again, you have to delete your Basilisk 2000 information from the registry edit. When you touch the cube, there's a sharp noise and an image flashes on your screen. A bloodied, elongated creature sits in the corner of a corporate-looking office. If you compare the creature to the cover of the original Basilisk, they actually look fairly similar. After this flash, soft crying begins playing. From here, we'll now visit the Waste map. Waste looks to be a giant destroyed cityscape with rundown buildings and vehicles. The first thing you're likely to notice are these creatures that walk around and blink in and out of existence as you get close and look at them. They just roam around the map and aren't dangerous or do anything. My knee-jerk reaction was that they looked like the Torn Basilisk, and I still think they look like the Torn Basilisk. They also evidently aren't the Torn Basilisk. The real interesting part of this map, though, isn't the creatures. There are two NPCs, one who says every day is the exact same until death, and another that tries to give you some quest but fails. All around the map, though, are weird pictures and text. The text that you can find is, like rats, unpleasant, spelled incorrectly, dirty, sunk, remove this world, data, it's gone on too long, enough. And on a pair of buildings are three phrases that I thought were connected, those being rot, the number 17, and Amacy. I figured that you might plug Amacy into another rotation cipher, or any of the words around here, but none of them fit. Finally, we can look at a few pictures scattered about. The first one is a starting screen for the original Basilisk, a picture of some kind of knight, but it isn't the same as the Torn Knight, a picture of some kind of an imp bothering a man, and finally, underneath of the world is a picture of the eye that kills you in the original Basilisk. We'll do a very short and sweet map next, which is Leave, from the office map from earlier. We load into an airport terminal, and there's nothing to see here but airplanes and terminal numbers. One plane, out near a building, is on its side though, and says, Doris drowned in doubt. I'll tell you now, I have no clue what that might all be about. I can't tell if it's a phrase, internet searches turn up nothing, doesn't seem to be an anagram for anything, and to my knowledge there's only two significant female NPCs, one being Cassie the AI developer, and whoever the tavern girl was that Scratch was sweet on. No Doris is ever mentioned again anywhere in any of the materials. The next map to explore is Death's Arrest. Here's an abandoned town where every store is closed. There's text underneath of the town that says, I'd die 1,000 deaths if I can die with you. Around the town are also these windows that show what look like a rotted office complex to me. As you walk around, you might hear little dings here and there, and if you run into the dings in a specific order, 3 things will spawn, 2 tablets and a headless creature. The creature again looks like the monsters from Waste, but I think are evidently not the same. The headless does have 100% darkness and 0 HP as well. The real interesting thing now, though, are 2 tablets which have coded messages on both of them. The first tome reads, I don't think it was me, not the murderer. What if I was the murdered? And the other tablet reads, I didn't just happen on it. Maybe ID edit was it. Was I, but it was perfect. A perfect Basilisk. The later text is kinda confusing with no punctuation and presumably misspellings, but I tried my best. Here's the raw text if you want to give it a shot yourself. We've got one more map to get into before we get into the really interesting stuff there is to look at. If you cycle through the songs, you may notice one referencing an arena, and sometimes the name of the places you visit are in the names of the songs. In this case, if you load arena, you load into combat with a few other NPCs. Anytime an NPC dies here in the arena, the crowd cheers. The NPCs themselves are uninteresting, much like the placeholder acts accessible outside the arena, but the really interesting thing is down one of the halls in the back areas of the game. The game suddenly goes from a fantasy RPG art style to a realistic art style of what sorta looks like an alleyway and a door with police tape across it. The music has changed from the combat arena to low industrial tones, and as you get close to the door, you're stopped, and there's text that says skinned. From here, we can step out of the game and back to the game files, and the build tool file is a video file and a locked zip archive. When you watch the video, it appears to be someone spying on 2 people having a name conversation between either Greg or George and Alan about David B acting weird. They talk about how David found a body downstairs in their building nearly 10 years ago, and about how he still talks about that event constantly. Alan is particularly worried because he knows David keeps a gun under his desk, and even though they're both concerned, they decide to just bring it up to HR after they complete the game. The video appears to be recorded by some Victor Laurie character, but Kira actually said that it is supposed to be David B spying on them, and the Victor name was an accident. Next, we can tinker with the locked zip file. If we input the words from the alleyway earlier, skinned, in all capital letters, it gives us an SMC file. SMC is the SNES ROM extension, so logically we'd want to plug that into the SNESY emulator from earlier. If you use it outside of the ROM folder, it'll just play like the normal Basilisk, but if you move the early build to the ROMs folder, it'll function correctly. You're dropped into the Basilisk-like map again, but this time with no floor textures. Eventually you'll run into another error, and it'll give you some interesting information. It congratulates you on making it back to when it all began. I hate to stop so early, but this is very interesting because this is when it began, not where it began, so the time that this game was being developed was likely the time that all this Basilisk business began. The error then tells about a group who skinned a man to alchemically make him a true Basilisk. They began with a man who was warped and a monster on the inside and sought to make his insides match his outsides. They removed almost everything, starting with the skin, until they'd created their true Basilisk, their monster. They'd kept it, fed it, poked it, and tortured it, and kept it locked away until they eventually forgot about it. But it lived, at least in the back of David's mind it did. Or was the Basilisk David? Or did he simply imagine the experiment? Or did he just work in the same building? Or was it all just a nightmare? David couldn't remember, and he didn't want to, but the Basilisk lived, and it will live, and the Basilisk will grow and starve, and it will feast. The game suddenly closes itself. That's a lot to digest, but we have one more secret surrounding this file for now. You can see this file isn't actually an SMC file, but a JPEG, and when you change the file extension to match that and open it up, you get a very muddied image. This image is layered by RGB values, and by separating them, special thanks to Bryce Boer for doing so, you actually get 3 different images. The red portion shows the office workers with their faces blacked out, and the word Basilisk, and the Basilisk body around the image. In the corner, though, is encoded Latin that says Mi melto et mori, or melt and die. Next is green, and is simply an anatomical diagram of a rib cage. Finally is blue, which is an image of a coyote eating a corpse of something, this time with Latin in the corner that reads Aliquando ut moriar, or Sometimes I Die. This is all to explore in the game files, but there are still 2 maps left in the game to explore, perhaps the 2 most important maps to the story. Starting Event, we now load into an abandoned office complex and can make our way around. If you loiter in a certain hallway for too long, the light bulb may break. Next, you make your way down a very dark hallway that looks extremely similar to the one from Arena. The door is the same, but instead of an alleyway, this seems to simply be a dark hallway. Once you enter the door, there are crime scene markers strewn about across the floor, and you can approach the wall here and reveal another encoded puzzle, which when you complete it spells out Within It. Also, somewhere around this map is some text I couldn't find, but a picture of it here says 1 skin, 1 arm, 1 leg, 3 rib cage. You can now exit the room and head to the exit, but nearby is an open door. When you step inside, it turns out to be a very meaty room that sometimes seems to expand and contract. There's nothing else to see here, but if you make your way back to the crime scene, you'll be approached by a crawling monster. It won't hurt you and will disappear before getting too close. Besides the crying and scratching, there's nothing else to see here, so you can leave. You can now plug the new level name, Within It, into the level loader. When you spawn, it's a very grainy pixelated metal platform surrounded by rusted metal and chains, with a few platforms around. There's only one thing to see here. Once you throw yourself over the edge and fall for a little while, text quickly pops up on the screen that says, First, there was a carapace to protect the frail workers from outward influence, but certain chambers became unused, abandoned, and neglected. In one such, a deprived soul slipped in, or was born in, or grew within. They sought to peel back the numbness, the boring day-to-day of life, and work within a carapace. To shed old skin, to gleam anew in fresh violence and terror. The residents sought material, gradually accumulating from transience, the skin of one, the bones of another, one twisted arm, one broken, and the text ends here. We've now covered absolutely everything there is to cover in Basilisk, so let's see what kind of a conclusion we might be able to draw. Breaking down the text from Within It, there was an office building, and one day an evil person started working there, or maybe already was there, but his heart suddenly darkened. They hated the numbness of the boring day-to-day office life. They wanted to shed their old skin and gleam anew in violence and terror. The residents sought material from the homeless and collected seemingly random materials and amounts of those materials, like skin, bones, arms, legs, and mostly ribs. Now we use the text from the original Basilisk Alpha, where the error tells us that at the same time this was going on, the original Basilisk game was being developed. At the same time, this person who was maiming the homeless and collecting these body parts was creating their own Basilisk. The Basilisk seems to have been forgotten by the person who created it, but David remembered it, even if he didn't want to. I think David was probably the person who was hurting these transients and killing them in a sort of fugue state until one time when he snapped to and reported the body that had been skinned to the police. David's memories of the event were repressed, and he'd go on to talk about it for years. Even though his memory of the event was foggy, it still bothered him greatly. Time passes, and David now runs a team of subordinates who makes games. David's obsession with the Basilisk that haunts his mind causes the event to bleed over into the games that he makes. Storylines surrounding basilisks, serpents, and darkness corrupting and killing people. At this time, I earnestly think Cassie was able to make what's referenced to as the Umbra AI, and is what interacts with us a few times throughout the story, like the error messages in the original Basilisk, and the smiley face in the Namor Tower. I think this AI also creates some of the areas from real life in the game that we play, like the office area, because it would be very weird for David to hide the gun under his desk in-game, and then replicate his rampage in a level builder just before doing that. It's not unheard of, and is certainly a possibility. I just find it more likely that this AI read the writing on the wall and created levels and secrets to show us the truth of what actually happened to David and his crew. Speaking of David, his paranoia and mania would cause him to keep a gun under his desk. David's subordinates were dragging their feet with the Basilisk 2000 project, creating little Easter eggs and disregarding David's notes instead of working on the project. I'm not sure what the straw that broke the camel's back was, but finally the beast in David awoke again, and David snapped. He shot and killed nearly all of his co-workers except for Dave, who maybe got away. If he did though, I figure we would have had something to go off of in Kyle Tubman's notes, but apparently the office is gone. A whole office gone. That's weird indeed. Maybe the note on Michael's desk was actually a note from David about hating this place and wanting to burn it down. And maybe David did just that, turning the story of a mass office shooting into an office fire instead. The police, I imagine, would be able to figure that out, but likely not before David made his way to the airport and fled the country. And that's that. There's a few things that still don't make sense to me exactly, like why Greg's darkness was so high, or the ice drakes for that matter. I don't exactly understand what waste is about. I think it's the AI creating little things to keep them busy, and pouring files they collected from their creators' computers, or generating them themselves to illustrate what happened in the case of the imp pestering the man, to reflect the basilisk in the back of David's mind. I don't know why the AI would create a post-apocalyptic area though, or what amnesty is supposed to mean. Hold it. This is Dirk coming to you from the editing room. I was actually able to find a weird niche definition from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. It says amnesty is defined as the mystery of what goes on behind the scenes of your social life, from the combination of amity, friendship, and conspiracy. This does wrap up that wording in a nice bow at least. Another thing I don't understand is the text that says Doris drowned in her own doubt. I can't draw the first conclusion at all about what this might mean. I also don't know why the Umbra AI is never referenced outside of promotional materials, or why those promotional materials would tout the sequel to a game that was never released. Finally, I don't really understand what the monument's supposed to mean since it's referenced in both games, but nothing really happens with it. Otherwise, I can pretty well say the holes in the story, like the Angel in the Moon was likely some unfleshed out story, like the Healing Fountain quest being unfinished. Anyways, this game's been giving me brain rot, and I'm glad to get to make this video. It helped me come up with a story to the game that satisfies me anyway, and I hope it was entertaining to watch for you too. You should buy Basilisk 2000, it's only like $2 on itch. The link to the Basilisk games are in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into Akuma Kira's Basilisk games. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later. So, I'm making this addendum after the 1.0 release of Lunacid, another game by Kira. It has a couple references to Basilisk in it, so I wanted to put them here because I don't think they're pertinent to the plot, but they are cool and exist, and this is a comprehensive video. So the first reference is an achievement in a body that just says Basilisk, you found a strange old corpse. It unlocks when you find the Basilisk body in-game, which looks a little bit different and similar to things we've already ran into with lots of extra appendages and stuff. The other reference is the Serpent's Fang, which we can collect in the game. I put the footage of me using it and its inventory description in this video just for posterity. And that's it. See you guys later, for real this time.